Welcome to a training video of the Import Gross Pay screen in PayPak Professional 4.0. This screen is used to import gross pay data from an import file which has a specific format used by PayPak Professional. Such data often comes from various electronic time clocks, and in most cases the original time clock data file must first be converted to the PayPak Professional format using our DataPak data conversion utility. You can learn more about DataPak by visiting the product page of our website. So let's sign in and show you how it works. Access code, my user ID, my password, I log in. And the import gross pay is found under the transaction section of the menu. Here's the button, import gross pay. So I click on the button and up comes the import gross pay screen. Let's start with a look at the layout of the screen and then I'll show you how it works. At the top you have the format for the import file. Under that you have the name of the import file and the date and time at which that selected file was updated. Top right, you've got some totals. The main part of the screen is a tab with 4 sections. There's an options section, a details section, which will show the entries from the selected import file, an errors section, and a session section. Under the tabs there is a progress bar which displays the entries being processed as they're being processed. And at the bottom of the screen there are a variety of buttons which control certain functions of the screen. So let's get started and show you how this all works. Most customers who will use this screen are using it to process data from their electronic time clock or their biometric time clock. And those time clocks have their own format. As I mentioned in the introduction, the software would not use that format in most cases. The majority of cases, those time clocks have their own format and you would use DataPak to convert it to the formats which PayPak 4 can read. There are 4 formats for PayPak 4 and 1 PayPak 3 format as well. So that you have 5 choices here. So let's just go through them quickly. You've got Excel 2007 and Excel 2003. You've got a comma separated CSV and a tab delimited TXT. The PayPak Professional 3 format is used for backward compatibility for customers who may have had either have a DataPak, one of the older versions of DataPak which worked with the previous version, PayPak 3, and that works fine for them and they still continue using files generated from that software, but they have upgraded to PayPak 4. So there's no need for them to change to the newer formats. There may also be some customers who they don't have a time clock system, but they use maybe an Excel file or to generate the CSV, the TXT file, because this PayPak 3 format is actually a comma separated file, despite the name ending with TXT. The extension of it ending with TXT, it is a CSV file, comma separated, as opposed to tab delimited. And I have in a folder here some of the formats. We got 5 files here. This ppm, let's start with the Excel. Sorry, it's by name maybe. Right. Excel 2007. This one here, gross pay Excel SX. we've got Excel 2003, the XLS one here. We've got the CSV here and the TXT one here. So these are the four PayPak 4 formats, and this fifth one here is the PayPak 3 format. Now, I'm just going to go through this for the benefit of the users who create their own files, because not everyone has a time clock system. There's some users who will create their own spreadsheet or their own text file and manually enter that information, maybe from some other source. Though the majority of customers hardly ever look into these files directly, or nor should they tamper with them actually, because they come from the time clock system and they're already formatted. For the most part, some of them look like gibberish. So unless you know what you're doing, you shouldn't interfere with these files, because you can very easily throw something out of place and ruin your whole payroll, your whole batch that you intend to import, to put it diplomatically. So let's start with the Excel 2007 format, because it's easier, I find, to understand the columns if you look at the Excel format. Now, here is an example of what the file looks like in Excel. You've got some columns here, and these are the specific columns that PayPak requires. You have the employee ID, which is the ID from PayPak. You have the employee number, which is the employee number also from PayPak. Now, you can use one or the other. Sometimes this information, the employee ID, can be recorded in the customer's time clock software. Sometimes it's not. The time clock has its own number, in which case you would enter the employee number in this field. That number will be picked up by PayPak to match the employee. You can also have both as well. So you can have one or the other, or both, but you can't have both blank. If both fields are blank, it can't import. It uses this to track who the employee is, either by the employee ID, as I said, or by the employee number. Next, you have the employee name. This is not used by PayPak. This is here only for reference for someone who is looking at the file to see what's inside of the file, or who may be editing the file. Next, you have the job type ID. This is optional. Each gross pay line has a job type, and if you enter the ID of the job type in here, if that's provided in here, that's what will be used. If it is blank, the software will use the job type ID for the matching line. There's an option to match the lines in the software. The next option is the pay rate ID, and this is the one that's most often used. This is the pay rate code from PayPak for the particular employee. And in this case, we have this code represents regular, and this one is for overtime. This is regular, this is overtime. So we have 6 lines for 3 employees. You have Carl Beavy, a regular line and overtime line, Kerry Bryan, a regular and overtime line, and David Bryan, a regular and an overtime line. The description is not used by PayPak at all. That's just there for humans to read and know what the codes are, because sometimes these codes may not always be clear in what they represent. So in this particular data import file, these are the codes it's going to look up, and the description, just as the employee name, are just there for your guidance when you're reading the file. They're not actually used in the import process to do anything. You have a reference column where you can put notes, like notes for a particular day, or something relating to that person's pay for that week or for that type of pay. It's optional, so it can be left blank. Then you have the quantity, and in most cases customers are going to have the employee profile set up with what rate the employee gets, but this pulls over the quantity, so you don't need the rate. The rate is here. In most cases that is left out. In some cases there may be cases where the rate is entered, but the majority of the time you're just sending over the quantity. The rate is already in the employee's profile. So this person, Carol Beavy, she's getting 40 regular hours and 2 overtime. Kerry Bryan is getting 40 regular and 4 overtime, and David Bryan is getting 40 hours and 6 overtime. Then we have, as I said, the rates, they're all zeros. There's a taxable column, and it's a capital Y if it's a taxable line, if that type of pay is taxable, and it's an N if that pay is to be not taxable. Then we have the last column is the type, which is standard pay. There are 3 options that you can have there. It can be standard pay, it can be benefit, and it can be service charge. You will see these fields in the gross pay section of the employee screen when you're setting up the employee gross pay. So we have a neat little import file here. 3 employees, 2 lines each, regular and overtime, a little variation with the hours. 2 overtime here, 4 overtime here, and 6 overtime here. Good. So that is the Excel 2007 file. The Excel 2003 file looks exactly like that. Same exact thing. All that's different is that instead of it being an Excel SX, it's an XLS, the older version of Excel. Well, it's actually 2007 to Excel 97 to Excel 2003. So same exact format, same exact data. We've made these files exactly the same. So we close this. The next one now is the CSV format, which is here. And the CSV format has the columns. These are separated by commas. That's what CSV means. CSV means comma separated values. So this particular file has a header line at the top here to guide you. It has the 6 lines of data. The header line is optional, both in the Excel spreadsheet you saw before and the CSV and text files. It's there to guide you, and again we have the same sort of information we had before in the Excel spreadsheet. You've got the employee ID. There's a space there for the employee number, which is the second bit of information because we're not using it in this case. The name of the employee, which is just for reference. This comma is for the job type code. This comma is for the pay rate code. This section is for the pay rate code. Then you have the pay rate description, and the same thing applies as with the Excel spreadsheet. The name and the description of the pay rate are only there to guide you as to which line is for which employee. After the regular, there is a space, and that is for the reference. Then you have the quantity, 42, 44, 46. And then you have the rate. Again, they're all zeros. The taxable, capital Y for yes, and it will be a capital N if it was no. And then the type is standard pay. With this format, it's very important that your information only has the commas to separate the values. You should not have an employee name which has a comma in it, or a pay rate description which has a comma in it. In fact, this description does not have to be the actual pay rate description in PayPak. This can be anything at all. It can even be blank, as a matter of fact. This could be blank, the pay rate description, and the employee name could also be blank. It will work perfectly fine if you did that, but the only problem is that you're sort of flying blind. It would work as far as everything which the computer requires is provided, as long as you provide whatever the computer requires. But if you don't have the employee's name or the description of the pay rate, it could be very confusing if you wish to edit this file, if you wish to edit it. Because, as I said, not everyone is creating this file from, or getting this file from a time clock. Some people use it, and if you're creating it manually, the best option probably would be to use the Excel, because it can be hard to follow this format. It looks a bit jumbled, and it's easy to make a mistake. Okay, now I'm going to keep this here for a moment because we need to come back to this. Let's go now to the last PayPak 4 format, which is the TXT, which is the tab separated. And again, it's the same information, except that it's separated by tabs. They don't fall into columns as nicely as in Excel, but it's somewhere close. And again, you've got the same layout. The employee ID, the employee number, the name, the pay rate ID, pay rate description, the quantity, the rate, taxable, capital Y, and the type, standard pay. Right, so that's the tab separated format. Finally, we have the PayPak 3 format, and if I open this, this is a comma separated format. And the only difference between these two, let me just dock this one here and dock that one there. Right, and let's have a look at them side by side. This is PayPak 4, this is PayPak 3. PayPak 4 has more lines, as you can see. Now, the reason for this is, don't mind this word wrap around this. Let's view and turn off that word wrap there. Good. PayPak 4 has one more line. It has the header line, which is optional in PayPak 4. So you can have a PayPak 4 import file which has this header line or does not have it. But PayPak 3 never used header lines. So the PayPak 3 format, in this case, does not have a header line. I believe with the changes that we made to PayPak 4, it's possible that you could add a header line, but I want to keep it in the original format. The files which used to generate the PayPak 3 format, the software that used to do that, they never used to have a header line, so we're keeping it in the original format. You have to be careful about the header line. If you process this file and you tell it that there's a header line, this first line will be excluded. The person will not, Carol Beavy will not get her regular hours sent over. She'll just get the overtime. Carrie Bryan and the others, they'll get theirs. But the first line, if you import the PayPak 3 format and forget to turn off the option for the header line, this line will be excluded. It will be treated as a header and excluded. That's why you have to be careful when importing to make sure that you know exactly what your options are and you set them correctly. Okay, so that's enough about the files. I think you should have gotten an idea by now of how they work. Now, we have the 5 files, as I said, and what I'm going to do, they all contain the same data. To test them, I'm going to import them 5 times. And I'm going to import them for 5 separate weeks. I don't want to import them for the same week. If I import them in the same week, the taxes would be calculated on top of each other, and the batches would come out differently. So I want to import them in 5 separate weeks. Okay, and we are going to start that right now to show you the process of how this works. First of all, though, we have to look at these options here. First option is prepare as a new batch. you have new batch, existing batch to combine with existing entries, and existing batch add as new entries. Now let's explain what these options would use for. New batch will create a new batch, and in that batch you will have only the employees who are in the time clock file. There are some customers, however, who may have other employees who are not in the time clock file and they wish to pay those employees. In that case, they have two options. They can create a new batch in the traditional manner, in the normal manner, under the new batch option on the menu. Then they import the time clock entries to that batch. So they would say, they would choose this option here, existing batch combined with existing entries. That's the option they would choose. That option would then allow them to import the time clock entries into that existing batch that they created, and then edit the batch to update the other employees. The third option is existing batch add as new entries, and that's a case where you have an existing batch, but you want these entries to be added separately. They're not to be combined, because combine, this is what combine means. In the process of importing the data from the time clock file, from the import file, the software, when you are dealing with an existing batch, let's say you're dealing with an entry for John Brown. If there's an entry in there for John Brown and it finds a match for him using his employee ID or his employee number, the import file entries will be added. The entries from the import file will be added to that existing entry in the batch. So it combines them. That's what it means. Combine with existing entries. Sometimes people want that. Sometimes they don't. You may have prepared a batch for John Brown, and that batch contains vacation pay, but you don't want his time clock entries to be combined with his vacation pay. That's when you would choose this entry, this option here, existing batch add as new entries. So these are separate new entries. Good. So in this, for the purpose of this demo, we are going to be using new batch. If it was an existing batch, this payroll set is disabled here. You choose the batch. These are unposted batches which I have in here. They're dated the 7th of May. You choose the batch and the information is added to that batch. But we're going, as I said, with new batch. Because we're going with new batch, we need to choose a payroll set. I'm trying to remember which payroll set these folks came from. Just let me, I think one was Carrie Bryan. Yes, that's right. One was Carrie Bryan. So let's have a quick peep at my payroll sets. And yeah, this is a bonus one. This is Oyston's monthly. Alright, this is Oyston's. Actually, these employees don't belong to any particular payroll set, apparently. Well, let's put them at, for Wharton, because from the names I saw there before, these two are in Wharton Weekly, but there's one from Oyston's Weekly. So let's just go with Wharton Weekly. Good. So that's the new batch. Okay. Ignore this because this is disabled now. That's because I chose that before. That's not going to do anything. So we have weekly payroll Wharton. That's my payroll set. Then I have my date. This will be the date it will use for the batch. Let me double click. Let's put this on the 7th of, I said 7th of May because of that other batch there. we're actually in June. So let's do the 4th of June going forward. Cool. So we have the 4th of June. My reference is optional. I'm not going to put anything in there. This will be the reference for the batch. Matching. This is important. You have 5 options here for matching. By line number means that, let's go to a file and show you. Let's use the Excel one. That's an easy one to refer to. Okay, let's minimize this fella here. Good. So the options, I might need to also move you aside a bit so that we have a little side-by-side thing going on here. All right, let's position you there. Bingo. Get you back over here. Fine. So, matching. First option is by line number. Line number means that it will look at the employee's gross pay for Carl Beavy. It finds 2 lines and it's going to drop this in line 1 and it's going to drop this in line 2. That's it, line number. That's rarely used. Next option is by job type. And what it would do is it would look for the job type and match by job type. We do not have a job type in here. Again, few customers use the job type option for importing, but some may do because it could be that this is for a construction company and you want to match the pay for a particular job. Okay, that's where that could be used. By pay rate is the most commonly used one, which is here. We have our pay rates here, regular and overtime. So what that will do when you match by pay rate, it will look for the first line of her, when it comes to this line here, it will look for the first line of her gross pay, which matches this regular pay rate code, REG, and will fill out that line with this information. When it comes to OT, it will look through her gross pay for the OT code and match these 2 hours. Then it will go to Carrie Bryan and do the same thing. Look for her regular line, look for her overtime line, fill those in. And for David Bryan, it will look for his regular line and his overtime line and fill those in as well. So pay rate is the most commonly used one. You also have the option of by job type and by pay rate, which means that this job type must have something in it and this pay rate must have something in it, and it combines them. So for example, if you had a construction worker who worked 20 hours at a West Coast site, and then they worked also 20 hours at a South Coast site, you could have 20 hours here and 20 hours here, and these will both be regular. These could both say regular. And then for the job type, you would have the West Coast, the code for the West Coast job type here, and the job type code for the South Coast site here. And if it was 30 hours at the West Coast and 10 hours at the South Coast, that would match it based on those 2 fields there. You just have to make sure the quantities are entered correctly. So that's another matching option. The other option is no matching. And with no matching, that is pretty much the same as the line number, right? Pretty much equivalent to it, I would say. So rarely used that I cannot even recall any customer who actually uses it. But the option is there. Most of the time, as I said, however, you will want to match by pay rate. The next option is the default rate. And that default rate, this is for when a line is not matched. Because if your import file contains a pay rate code, we're matching by pay rate codes. If it contains a pay rate code which is not, let's say we had something called here extra. Okay, you had a pay rate called extra. and you had a line in there for that, but that line is not in the employee's gross pay profile. It will not find it, so it has to add it. And when it adds it, it has to get the rate from somewhere. And even when it does find it, so that rate can come either from the gross pay or it can come from the pay rates. Most of the time you'll want what's in the pay rates, in the gross pay, because that's what the person is being paid. You may pay Carol Beavy $10 an hour. You may pay Kerry Bryan $9 an hour. But the basic pay rate could be set at the minimum wage of $8.50. So if you choose gross pay, when it matches, it will put $10 for Carol Beavy in here. When it imports the file, it'll give $9 to Kerry Bryan, and if it were to find the regular pay rate not set up for David Bryan in his gross pay profile, it would assign the rate then to the pay rates. If it doesn't find it in the gross pay, then it looks to the pay rates. But the default would be from the gross pay. That's usually what you would want. And the same thing could happen there with the extra one. Let's just remove that. I don't want that in here. Let's undo that. What have I done? Let's undo that. Fine. Good. Now, the next option is the quantity option, to replace the existing quantity or add to the existing quantity. Most times you probably want replace, because if you were to import the file again, you want to replace whatever you pulled in the first time. So if you imported and it brought over 40 hours, if you're going to import it again with the option set to replace, it will replace it with 40 hours. But if you say add, it will double the 40 to 80, it will double the 2 to 4, it will double the 4 to 8, it will double the 6 to 12. So most of the time you want to choose replace existing quantity, most of the time. Now, these options here you have to pay particular attention to, because you have to match these to what is in your import file. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options, and they change according to what you set your matching to. See, some of them are turned on or off. So when you're at by pay rate, these are the ones that are like, I can't change pay rate. If you're matching by pay rate, you must have the pay rate. That is disabled, and the quantity is disabled as well. You can't change the quantity because the quantity is being imported. So you don't have an option to turn that on or off. So matching by pay rate, you can't turn on or off the pay rate. You can't turn on or off the quantity. Let me tell you what the fields are and how they should be set. Job type will be ticked only if you have or want the job type to come from this file. If it's blank, you got to turn this off. If it's there but you don't want it, you can still turn it off. If it's there and you want it, you tick it. Okay? Fine. The reference is only for the PayPak 4 formats. You know what? That reminds me. The PayPak 3 format. So let me see if let's go back to that file. The PayPak 3 format here does not have the reference which the PayPak 4 format carries. PayPak 4 CSV. Let's have a look at them. Remember, I was talking about the 2 formats for the comma separated right. The PayPak 3 one, remember, that does not have the header line, nor does it have the reference. I may have missed that earlier when I was explaining the difference between these two. PayPak 3 did not have the reference. This is a new field that was added with PayPak 4. So if you're importing for PayPak 3, you have to turn off the reference. Make sure your reference is off. Okay, there's no reference there. If you look here, we don't have the reference. So if you look at regular, there's a gap for the reference, and then there's the 40 hours. In this case, there's no gap. There's the description, regular, and then the comma, and then it goes straight to the 40 hours. So going back here, there is the reference which you have. If you have PayPak 4 and you have something in there, then you can tick it to import it if you wish. As I said, the quantity would always be on. There's the option for the rate, which you can turn that on or off. By default, it's off because the rate would be in PayPak 4. Taxable, this is ticked. The taxable is there. And the type. The type by default is standard pay. You could import it, that's no problem because it's there. Okay, so I'm going to import those. Once I've chosen the options here, I will click my settings button. That's very important. Click the settings because when you exit the screen and come back next time, these are set to what you want them to be. But we got some other options here. Let's look at what these do. For new entries, do you apply taxes and deductions? Normally you would probably say yes to that. If you turn these off, when you add it, if it adds a new entry, if it does not find a matching entry, if it doesn't match the final entry, it goes to create a new entry. These are the defaults for the new entries. So new entry says imported lines only. Now what that would do is you have an entry for John Brown in the import file. It finds his name. Imported lines only would import only. Suppose he only had a regular and overtime lines in here. If you had imported lines only ticked, it would only for that new entry for him import those two lines. Right? If he was not, in this case, if the person is not in the batch or the if this is mainly used if you are adding to an existing batch for the most part. Not a new batch. So if you said imported lines only, it only brings over the regular and the overtime, and it excludes any other lines in his normal gross pay profile. So if you're doing new entries, you probably may want to turn this off so that all the lines from his employee profile come over and it fills out in them the ones which it matches. Anything else it doesn't find, if it doesn't find them, it adds them as new lines. And then there are rules for new lines as well. These are for percentage deductions. This is a feature of the gross pay where if you have lines which apply to which qualify for percentage deductions, this is the option to turn them on or off. You could probably tick this and have it turned on if it matches, if these lines are for percentage deductions. The other options are for the file. As I mentioned before, it's very important to specify whether your data has headers or not. The default in PayPak 4 is to have the headers, which is this row here. The default in there's no option in PayPak 3 for headers. So for PayPak 3, you would have the headers, data has headers turned off. It is possible to have a PayPak 4 file which does not have headers. So make sure that you know what you're doing when you come to do this part. Next option is delete after importing. That's optional. You have to decide what you're doing. I don't recommend deleting the file after you import it because maybe you may find that something went wrong after you have imported it. You may find that maybe you mess up the batch or something goes wrong after you've imported it. You want to import it again, and it helps to have the file there. Some people, the file name will be the same. It will always say gross pay. Some other people, the file will have the name of the week it belongs to. So it would say gross pay for the 4th of June. So if the file has the same name, every week when it's created, it overwrites the one that was there before, or every time it's created, because it could be weekly, it could be fortnightly, it could even be monthly. If the file has a different name, that means the old files will always be there. So I tend not to turn this on when I'm doing my importing. It's your choice. You can always get it back from the time clock system, but that sometimes can be a time-consuming process, and it's often quicker. If you have a problem when you're doing your payroll, that means that your payroll is delayed, whether it's by 3 seconds, 3 minutes, or 3 hours, or even 3 days. So if your payroll is delayed, you want to minimize additional delays. Having the import file there cuts down on the time it takes to go and create that file or get that file again. In some cases, people have to contact a separate department to get those import files back into the folder. So, enough talk. Let's get started, people. The first step is to display. I'm going to hit my settings here. Okay, so I've got my settings saved. Normally, once these are saved, you never have to come back in here each week. Okay, you never have to come back in here each week. All you do is that you pick the file, and that's even if the file name has changed. If the file name doesn't change, you look here to make sure that the date modified and time modified is correct. You click on the display button and proceed from there. You may want to put, well, you can put the date of the batch. Yeah, you'll put a date for the batch. So that's one thing you would put, and maybe a reference. But for the most part, you're not going to be touching these. Neither do you want anyone coming in here and meddling with them. So let's begin. We hit display. Okay. It's complaining the file is in use, so I should close out of it. Sorry about that. And I've displayed, and here are my details. So I've got Carol Beavy, 40 hours, 2 hours overtime, 40 and 4, 40 and 6. Okay. There are 6 lines. There's no errors. I can now import this, and it says, do you want to do this? And I've imported, and I've just created a batch 191. Okay. I have an overlapping entries in there. That's going to ruin our fun. There's another batch, number 190, which had vacation pay in it. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that date. I'm going to change the date of that batch and recalculate it, because that will create some problems for us. I want a month. Let's I want to show in the demo that the totals come over the same. And if there are vacation pay entries from previous weeks which overlap into June, that's going to throw off my taxes. So I need to edit that batch, which is here. And I'm going to change the date. Let's go down maybe 2 months. Let's go down, and instead of June, let's push it back to August. Okay, we use August 6. I could probably use the mass edit here. Well, it's just 2 of them. Don't be lazy. Just if there were more batches, I could have used the mass edit for this. But we'll make all of these August the 6th. Good. So my batches are now dated August the 6th. I will recalculate them. And my taxes figure should change. Yes, it has changed. And that is my total. So I hope that everything in there is okay. So August the 6th, and that's batch 191. Let's just maximize this. Okay. Back now to our import gross pay. Under session, this is what I've got. This is the file. This was the date, and that's the time that it was done. Okay, now I'm going to choose a XLS file. Don't have them open. I'm going to browse and pick the XLS file. I'll do my display again, and once again these are my names. They've come right over. You know what, I gotta change that date. New batch, Wharton, and let's go for August the 13th, the following week. And I've got my entries there. I can now do my import, and that's batch 192. Moving on now to the comma separated CSV. I come here, that's my gross pay. New batch, Wharton, August the 20th. Display, again, no errors. I import, and you can import hundreds of employees very quickly using this feature. Now we go now to the tab delimited format, new batch, Wharton. This would be August the 27th. Display. Oops, I forgot to change the file. So I come here and I would choose txt, gross pay. I do my display and I do my import, and that's 194. And finally I want to do the PayPak 3 format. Click here, choose PP import. I think I have all my options set up. I do my display. Those are the files there. I do my import. Oops, I forgot to choose the payroll set. Wharton. And the week we're going for, I think that runs into September now. 3rd of September. I display and I import. And I have batch 195. So I've just created 5 batches. See? Now we're going to have a look at those batches before we come back to the screen. And if I refresh here, sweet. As you can see, these are my batches, 4th of June. Sorry. Why does that say 4th of June? Oh, sorry, that was the batch date. I did not change the batch date. I changed the earning date, but I didn't change the batch date. So let's just quickly do that. Just go to batch control, and there you go. Select you, change date, and we want that to be the 6th of August. We update you, and we are now good to go. So in edit batch, I now have my 5 batches created from 5 import files. One from Excel 2007, Excel 2003. There is the CSV, a TXT tab delimited, and a PayPak 3 comma separated format. So they're exactly the same. The totals are the same. That's why I separated them into separate weeks, so the taxes did not overlap. You've got the same taxes, the same deductions, the same net pay. And if you look into the batch, let's go into one of them. It's just like any other batch which you would have created. There's the gross pay entries, and here you can see the 40 hours for Carol Beavy and the 2 hours overtime, 40 regular and 2 hours overtime. Just undo my editing there, I'm not changing anything. Then next person, David Bryan. Okay, so that's the 3 of them in this batch. Right, and the other batches are all the same. So the batches have been imported. You've seen how it works, so just go back and finish up. The New button will clear the screen. The errors button will print the errors. If you have errors, they will appear here and you can track down what the errors are. The refresh button is to refresh certain of the options on the screen. The settings button saves these options that you have configured, the folder as well as the format that you're using. The reset button will clear the settings. The video button will open your browser and launch the YouTube video which you are currently viewing. And the exit button closes the screen, which brings this video to a close as well. Thank you so much for your time as usual. It's been a pleasure to present the videos to you, and please look out for the next one in this series. Goodbye and take care.